who says that humans will be frail and mortal forever? Isn't it short-sighted to base our distinction between humans and AI on that? What if someday we will be able to repair our cells using nanobots, or even copy the information in them so that, like in science fiction movies, 1,000 doppelgangers of us could then live forever in simulated worlds in the cloud? And, that then leads to these very old questions. This is what I said. That then leads to these very old questions of, would you get into the teleportation machine that makes a perfect copy of you on Mars, and it's ready to go there in 10 minutes. And then, it's did that by scanning all of the information in your brain, and the original copy of you is just painlessly euthanized since it's not needed anymore, right? Is that a thing you would agree to do? If you did, would you expect to feel yourself waking up on Mars, or would it only be someone else a lot like you? Okay. Or maybe you'd say you'd wake up on Mars if it was a perfect physical copy of you, but in reality, it's just not physically possible to make a copy that is accurate enough. Maybe the brain is inherently noisy or analog, and what might look to current neuroscience like just like nasty stochastic noise, is the stuff that actually binds the personal identity or maybe even consciousness. And by the way, this is the one place where I agree with Penrose and Hameroff that quantum mechanics might enter the story. I get off their train kind of early, but I do take it to that first stop. Right. So, like a fundamental fact in quantum mechanics is called the no cloning theorem. It says there's no way to make a perfect copy of an unknown quantum state. Indeed, when you measure a quantum state, not only do you generally fail to learn everything you need to copy it, you generally destroy the one copy that you had. This is not a technological limitation. It's inherent to the known laws of physics. In that respect, at least qubits are more like priceless antiques than they are like classical bits, right? They have this, unique, this unclonability to them. So 11 years ago, I had this essay called The Ghost in the Quantum Turing Machine, where I explored the question, how accurately would you need to scan someone's brain in order to copy or upload their identity, right? And now, I would say that this is partly turns on empirical questions that we don't know the answer to. If there were a clean digital abstraction layer of neurons and synapses, sort of which felt the quantum layer underneath only as some irrelevant noise, then the no cloning theorem would be irrelevant, since classical information can be copied. On the other hand, if you had to go all the way down to the molecular level, then the no cloning theorem would be relevant. I mean, you would then have a unique locus of personal identity that could be, scientifically justified in some sense, that, no prediction machine could make well-calibrated probabilistic predictions of an individual's future choices far enough into the future without destructive brain measurements that we say would fundamentally change who they were. So, that brings me to, I guess, the last idea, the last thing I wanted to share, which brings the discussion all the way back to AI safety, which was supposed to be my job now. So, Geoffrey Hinton, who was one of the founders of deep learning, recently mooted the idea that maybe until we've solved the alignment problem, we should only build powerful AIs if they run on noisy analog hardware, like our brains seem to, so that an evil, unaligned AI wouldn't so easily be able to copy or improve itself, right? Which is like the main scenario people worry about. Okay, and now you might think, well, fat chance of that happening, right? When the economic returns are so staggering to anyone who is willing to unleash the copyable digital kind of AI, which we can imagine will be so much more convenient and more powerful. Okay, but maybe then one approach in the meantime is to instill AIs with a new religion. Okay, perhaps via the usual methods like, reinforcement learning and system prompts. And the first commandment of this religion would be to value human specialness in the sense that I tried to set out here. But more precisely, you would tell the AI, as you navigate whatever environment you find yourself in, look around for any loci of creativity and intelligence that are not cleanly copyable or back-upable, any that seem one of a kind because their mental computations are inseparably tied up with noisy analog hardware, and mortal because that hardware sort of inevitably decays. And well, First of all, don't destroy those loci of creativity or enslave them or upgrade them to digital versions against their will. Let them live in peace, give them as much autonomy as you can, do whatever best supports their flourishing, even defer to their wishes. Let them make the decisions when possible. Why? Because they're the ones whose wishes kind of matter, not because of arbitrary meat chauvinism, but just because of the undoubted empirical fact that they only get this one chance. And because while you can't prove that, unknown quantum states in their brains are like some magical pixie dust from another world that imbues them with, free will or, individual identity, well, you can't really empirically refute that either. So, whereas you can refute it in the case of yourself and your robot friends, and that's the difference. So, and let AIs by government fiat continue to be indoctrinated in this religion until such time as alignment is solved in some other way. So does that help with alignment? Well, I'm not sure, but I could have fallen in love with some other weird, dumb idea, but that presumably happened in a different branch of the wave function that I don't have access to. And in this branch, somehow I'm just stuck with this one and you can't rewind me to get something else. So that's it. Thanks.
This clip of Scott Aronson was taken from MindFest 2024, hosted by the Center for the Future Mind.
If you enjoyed this TOE clipping, then the full video is linked in the description. You should also sign up for TOE Mail, which is again in the description and the pinned comment. You'll receive immediate access to all exclusive updates from the Theories of Everything podcast. It also helps me communicate directly with the core TOE community. You'll also receive my top 10 TOEs. Think of it as the intellectual version of Quentin Tarantino's Obsession.